I am sitting here in this sterile hospital room, watching my 16-year-old son Dylan sleep peacefully, despite the cancer ravaging his young body. The steady beep of machines fills the silence, but all I can hear are the cruel words I spoke to him 3 months ago. Words that shattered something between us that may never fully heal. My son caught me in my betrayal, and instead of owning my mistakes, I told him I wished he would just die. The memory burns through me every single day. Before I share the story of the biggest mistake of my life, I want to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. I am about to tell you about how one moment of anger can destroy the most precious relationship you have. Prepare yourself because this is about how I nearly lost my son forever with words I can never take back. Let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Francesca, and I have been married to Marcus for 12 years. We live in suburban Ohio, where Marcus works as an electrical engineer for a manufacturing company. His job requires frequent travel sometimes for weeks at a time. 2 years ago, our world changed forever when our son Dylan was diagnosed with lymphoma at age 14. Suddenly, our comfortable middle-class life became a constant rotation of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and sleepless nights filled with worry. The burden of Dylan's care fell primarily on my shoulders. Marcus tried to be supportive, but his work demanded more of his time than ever before. The company was expanding internationally, and he was leading several major projects. While I understood the financial necessity, I often found myself alone in hospital, waiting rooms holding Dylan's hand through treatment sessions, managing his medications, and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for our family. The isolation was crushing. Friends gradually stopped calling uncomfortable with the heaviness of our situation. Family members lived too far away to provide regular support. I felt like I was drowning in responsibilities, grief, and fear. Every day brought new challenges as Dylan's treatment progressed. Some days he was strong enough to attend school, other days he could barely lift his head from the pillow. I watched my vibrant, athletic son transform into a frail shadow of himself, and I felt powerless to help him. That is when Jake entered our lives. Dr. Jake Patterson was one of the oncologists at Children's Hospital, where Dylan received treatment. He was in his early 40s, divorced with graying temples and kind eyes that seemed to see straight through to my exhausted soul. Initially, our interactions were purely professional. He would update me on Dylan's progress, explain treatment protocols, and answer my endless questions with patience and compassion. But gradually, our conversations began to extend beyond medical matters. Jake would find reasons to check on Dylan when his shift was ending, often staying late to chat with me about how I was coping. He was the first person in months to ask about my well-being instead of just Dylan's condition. These conversations became the highlight of my day. Jake understood the unique stress of dealing with childhood cancer because he witnessed it every day. He knew the right things to say when I felt overwhelmed, and he never made me feel guilty for struggling. One evening, after a particularly difficult chemotherapy session, Dylan was sleeping and Marcus was traveling for work again. Jake found me crying quietly in the family lounge. Instead of offering empty platitudes, he sat beside me and simply listened as I poured out my fears about losing my son and my marriage slowly crumbling under the weight of our circumstances. That night, Jake gave me his personal cell phone number and told me to call if I ever needed someone to talk to. The first text message was innocent enough. I thanked him for his kindness and mentioned how much it meant to have someone who understood. He responded with encouragement and asked how I was holding up. These exchanges became daily occurrences, then multiple times per day. Jake would send me funny memes during Dylan's long treatment sessions, share articles about maintaining hope during difficult times, and check in when he knew we had important test results coming back. Our first meeting outside the hospital happened 3 weeks later. Jake suggested we grab coffee to discuss some new treatment options for Dylan. We met at a small cafe downtown, and for the first time in months, I found myself laughing. Jake had a dry sense of humor and an easy way of making conversation. What was supposed to be a 30-minute medical consultation stretched into a 3-hour conversation about everything except cancer. I told myself I was not doing anything wrong. Marcus was never available to talk, always distracted by work, even when he was physically present. Jake was offering friendship and emotional support during the most challenging period of my life. I convinced myself that I deserved this small source of happiness. The guilt was there, lurking beneath the surface, but I pushed it down and focused on how alive I felt when talking to someone who truly listened. Our relationship crossed physical boundaries during our fourth meeting. We had been discussing Dylan's upcoming scan results, and I broke down crying from the stress and uncertainty. Jake comforted me, and suddenly we were kissing in his car outside the restaurant. The rational part of my brain screamed that this was wrong, but the lonely, exhausted part of me craved the connection and intimacy that had been missing from my marriage for so long. Meanwhile, Dylan was becoming increasingly observant despite his illness. The cancer had not diminished his intelligence or awareness of family dynamics. He began noticing small changes in my behavior. I was checking my phone more frequently, smiling at text messages, and occasionally disappearing for longer periods than necessary when running errands. Dylan had always been intuitive, and even while fighting his own battle, he sensed something was different about our family equilibrium. The first real red flag came when Dylan had a reaction to his medication late one evening and needed immediate medical attention. Marcus was in Detroit for a conference, and I was unreachable for nearly 2 hours because I had silenced my phone during dinner with Jake. When I finally saw the missed calls and rushed to the hospital, Dylan was stable but shaken. He asked me directly where I'd been, and my excuse about having a dead phone battery felt hollow, even to my own ears. As my relationship with Jake deepened, I found myself living two completely separate lives. During the day, I was Dylan's devoted mother, advocating for his care, managing his appointments, and trying to keep his spirits up during the darkest moments of his treatment. But in stolen hours here and there, I became someone else entirely. With Jake, I was not the worried mother or the neglected wife. I was simply Francesca, a woman worthy of attention, affection, and desire. Our meetings became more frequent and elaborate. Jake knew my schedule well since it revolved around Dylan's treatment calendar. He would arrange to meet me during the gaps between appointments or suggest dinner when Marcus was traveling. We started meeting at hotels outside the city, taking long drives through the countryside, sharing intimate dinners at restaurants where we would not encounter anyone from our respective circles. I justified every encounter by reminding myself of everything I had sacrificed over the past 2 years. My career as a marketing coordinator had been put on indefinite hold. My social life had evaporated. My marriage had become a practical arrangement focused solely on managing Dylan's illness and Marcus's demanding work schedule. With Jake, I could remember who I used to be before cancer consumed our family's entire existence. The lies came easier than I expected. I told Marcus I was joining a support group for parents of children with cancer, which explained my evening absences. I claimed to be shopping for special foods that might help Dylan's appetite, accounting for my longer daytime disappearances. I said I was meeting with other mothers from Dylan's treatment group, creating a network of fictional friends to cover my tracks. But Dylan was watching everything. Despite the fatigue and discomfort from his treatment, he remained sharp and observant. He noticed when I dressed up for supposed grocery store trips. He saw me laughing while texting something that had become rare in our household over the past 2 years. He observed my improved mood, which seemed disconnected from his own health status or family circumstances. The turning point came during one of Dylan's emergency hospital visits. He had developed a fever, which was always serious for someone undergoing chemotherapy due to his compromised immune system. Marcus was in Chicago closing a major deal, and I was supposed to be immediately available for any medical emergencies. But I had turned off my phone during what was supposed to be a quick coffee meeting with Jake that had turned into a 3-hour lunch. When I finally arrived at the hospital, Dylan was stable but had been frightened and alone for over 2 hours. The nurses had been trying to reach me, and Dylan had been asking for me repeatedly. He looked at me with questions in his eyes that I could not answer honestly. My explanation about traffic and a phone with poor reception felt inadequate, even as I spoke the words. That night, Dylan pretended to sleep while I made phone calls to Marcus and various family members to update them on his condition. But he was listening carefully to every conversation, and he noticed something troubling. When I thought he was unconscious, I received a call that I took in hushed, intimate tones. The way I spoke was completely different from my conversations with his father or grandparents. There was warmth, affection, and a softness in my voice that had been absent from our family interactions for months. Several days later, Dylan asked Marcus to bring him to the hospital early for his next appointment because he wanted to surprise me. They arrived an hour before the scheduled time and went looking for me in the usual waiting areas. When they could not find me, Dylan suggested checking the parking garage. That is where my 16-year-old son, weak from cancer treatment but determined to understand what was happening to our family, witnessed me in an intimate embrace with Dr. Jake Patterson. Dylan said nothing in that moment. He simply turned around and walked back toward the hospital entrance, leaving Marcus confused about why the surprise visit was suddenly unnecessary. But something fundamental shifted in Dylan's demeanor from that day forward. He became quiet, withdrawn, and seemed to carry a weight that went beyond his physical illness. For the next week, Dylan wrestled silently with what he had witnessed. I could sense his internal struggle but could not understand its source. He would start to say something to me, then stop mid-sentence and change the subject. He watched me with new intensity, studying my expressions and reactions in ways that made me uncomfortable. The easy companionship we had maintained even during his illness felt strained and artificial. Dylan was facing an impossible situation. He was 16 years old, fighting for his life against cancer, and now dealing with the knowledge that his mother was betraying their family. The burden was enormous for someone who should have been focused entirely on getting well. But Dylan had inherited my analytical nature and Marcus's sense of justice, and he could not simply ignore what he had seen. The internal conflict was visible in everything Dylan did. He would start to confide in Marcus about something important, then pull back when he realized the devastating impact his knowledge would have on his father. He considered talking to his grandparents or his older cousin Emma, but he understood instinctively that this was information with the power to destroy our family completely. The weight of carrying this secret was making him sicker than the chemotherapy. Meanwhile, I remained oblivious to Dylan's knowledge of my affair. I attributed his mood changes to the normal ups and downs of cancer treatment, the frustration of being a teenager with limited energy and freedom, or perhaps anxiety about upcoming test results. I continued my relationship with Jake while believing I was successfully compartmentalizing my two lives. Marcus was scheduled for another business trip to finalize contracts with a supplier in Texas. The trip would last 5 days, providing Dylan with the privacy he needed to address the situation directly with me. He had decided that confronting me was the only way forward despite his fear of the consequences. Dylan spent those days before Marcus's departure planning exactly what he would say and trying to prepare himself for my potential reactions. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday evening in March. Marcus had been gone for 2 days, and I had just returned from what I told Dylan was a grocery shopping trip. In reality, I had spent 3 hours with Jake at a restaurant 40 minutes away, discussing our growing feelings for each other and making plans for a weekend getaway when Marcus would be traveling again. I was in an unusually good mood, humming while I put away groceries that I had hastily purchased to maintain my cover story. Dylan was sitting at our kitchen table having finished his homework, despite feeling nauseated from his morning treatment. He had been waiting for me to return, rehearsing his opening words and trying to summon the courage to begin a conversation that would change everything. When I walked through the door with my shopping bags and cheerful demeanor, something inside him finally broke. "Mom," Dylan said quietly, "who is Jake?" The question hit me like a physical blow. My hands froze while unpacking groceries, and I felt my face flush with heat. For a moment, I considered pretending not to know what he meant, but the directness of his gaze told me that denial would be useless. Dylan was not asking because he was curious. He was asking because he already knew. "I do not know what you are talking about." I responded automatically, but the words sounded hollow, even to my own ears. "Yes, you do," Dylan replied with a steadiness that surprised us both. "I saw you with him in the parking garage last week. I know you have been meeting him. I know you have been lying to me and Dad about where you go." The grocery bag slipped from my hands and canned goods rolled across the kitchen floor. The sound echoed in the sudden silence between us. I stared at my 16-year-old son, this brave boy who was fighting cancer while his mother was destroying his family, and I felt a mixture of shame, panic, and inexplicable anger rising in my chest. "Dylan, you do not understand the situation." I began, but he cut me off. "What do I not understand, Mom? That you are cheating on Dad while I am sick? That you have been lying to us for months, that you care more about yourself than about our family? The accusation stung because it contained elements of truth that I was not ready to acknowledge. Instead of taking responsibility, I became defensive. Instead of comforting my sick child who had discovered something traumatic, I attacked. You have no idea what I have been going through, I snapped. You have no idea what it is like to be married to someone who is never here, who cares more about his job than his family. You have no idea what it is like to handle all of this alone. Dylan's eyes widened at my response. He had expected denial, maybe anger, but he had not expected me to justify my betrayal by claiming victimhood. Handle what alone, Mom? I am the one with cancer. I am the one who might die. And you are worried about feeling lonely. That question should have stopped me cold. It should have made me realize the enormity of what I was saying to my dying child. Instead, it triggered something ugly and defensive inside me, something that had been building for months of stress, fear, and guilt. Do not you dare use your cancer to guilt me, I said, my voice rising. Do not you dare make me the villain because I found someone who actually cares about what I'm going through. The words hung in the air between us like poison. Dylan stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a combination of disbelief, hurt, and something that looked like adult disappointment in someone he had trusted completely. I cannot believe my own mother is cheating while I am fighting for my life, he said quietly. That statement, delivered with such profound sadness rather than anger, should have awakened every maternal instinct I possessed. It should have made me drop to my knees and beg forgiveness from this brave child who needed his mother's love more than anything else in the world. Instead, it triggered the most shameful moment of my entire life. Maybe if you were not such a burden, I heard myself saying, if you would just die from your cancer, or better yet, if you had never been born to me, I would not need to find happiness elsewhere. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the kitchen clock seemed to stop ticking. Dylan did not cry, did not shout, did not storm out of the room. He simply sat there staring at me with an expression of complete devastation, as if I had reached inside his chest and torn out his heart with my bare hands. I immediately realized the magnitude of what I had just said to my dying child, but the words were already out there, already burning themselves into both of our memories forever. Dylan, I did not mean... I started, but he shook his head slowly. You meant every word, he said, in a voice barely above a whisper. I can see it in your eyes. You meant every single word. He stood up slowly, his movements careful because the chemotherapy made him weak and dizzy. He walked past me toward his bedroom without another word, and I heard his door close quietly behind him. The gentle click of that door closing was somehow more devastating than if he had slammed it. I stood alone in our kitchen, surrounded by scattered groceries, fully comprehending for the first time what kind of mother I had become. I had just told my 16-year-old son, who was fighting cancer, that I wished he had never been born. I had blamed him for my own choices, my own weaknesses, my own betrayal of our family. There was no justification, no excuse, no way to take back what I had just done. The 3 days that followed were the longest of my entire life. Dylan remained in his room, emerging only for meals which he ate in complete silence. He would not look at me, would not respond to my attempts at conversation, and seemed to have withdrawn into himself completely. I tried multiple times to talk to him through his bedroom door, but he never responded. The silence was more punishing than any anger could have been. When Marcus returned from his business trip, the change in our household was immediately apparent. Dylan, who usually greeted his father enthusiastically, despite feeling sick, barely acknowledged his return. The easy conversation that normally flowed between father and son was replaced by polite, minimal responses to direct questions. Marcus knew something significant had happened, but Dylan would not explain, and I could not bring myself to confess what I'd done. The stress of keeping this secret while watching Dylan suffer in silence began affecting his physical health. His appetite disappeared completely, he had trouble sleeping, and his already compromised immune system seemed to weaken further. During his next hospital visit, Dr. Patterson, my former lover Jake, expressed concern about Dylan's emotional state and its impact on his recovery. The irony of receiving this feedback from the man who had been central to our family's destruction was not lost on me. That night, I made the decision to end my relationship with Jake completely. I sent him a brief message explaining that I could no longer continue our affair and asking him to respect my decision by not contacting me again. Jake responded with understanding and professionalism, acknowledging that our relationship had become complicated and wishing Dylan well in his continued treatment. True to his word, he maintained appropriate boundaries during all subsequent medical interactions. But ending the affair did not repair the damage I had done to my relationship with Dylan. If anything, my son seemed to sense that something had changed and his withdrawal became even more pronounced. He stopped sharing details about how he was feeling, stopped asking me to stay with him during treatments, and began requesting that Marcus accompany him to appointments whenever possible. The breaking point came 2 weeks later during a family dinner. Marcus was describing a successful project completion, trying to maintain normal family conversation despite the obvious tension. Dylan was picking at his food, barely participating in the discussion. In an attempt to engage him, Marcus asked Dylan about his plans for returning to school part-time when his treatment schedule permitted. "I do not know if I want to go back," Dylan replied quietly. Marcus and I both looked up surprised by this response. Dylan had been eager to return to normal activities and reconnect with his friends. "What do you mean, buddy?" Marcus asked gently. "You have been looking forward to seeing everyone again." Dylan looked directly at me for the first time in weeks, and the pain in his eyes was unbearable. "I just do not see the point anymore," he said. "Some things change so much that you cannot go back to the way they were before." In that moment, I understood that my words had not just hurt Dylan's feelings. They had fundamentally altered his sense of hope, his belief in our family, and his motivation to fight for his recovery. My selfishness and cruelty were literally contributing to my son's surrender to his illness. That night, I made an appointment with a therapist who specialized in family trauma. I knew I needed professional help to understand how I had become capable of saying such destructive things to my child, and more importantly, how I could begin to repair the damage I had caused. The therapist, Dr. Maria Santos, helped me recognize that my affair and my cruel words to Dylan were symptoms of my inability to cope with the stress and powerlessness I felt about his illness. Over the following weeks, I began to understand that my betrayal of our family had been a misguided attempt to regain control and find joy in a situation where I felt helpless. But rather than addressing my feelings constructively, I had chosen to escape into a fantasy relationship that required me to lie to the people I loved most. When Dylan confronted me with the truth, I had lashed out at him because he represented everything I was trying to escape from. The work of rebuilding trust with Dylan was slow and painful. I started by writing him a letter, acknowledging the full extent of my wrongdoing, taking complete responsibility for my choices, and expressing my genuine remorse for the pain I had caused him. I did not ask for forgiveness or make excuses. I simply owned what I had done and committed to earning back his trust through consistent actions rather than words. Dylan read the letter but did not respond immediately. However, I began to notice small changes in his behavior. He started eating meals with the family again, though he remained quiet. He allowed me to drive him to some of his medical appointments, though he often brought headphones and did not engage in conversation. These tiny steps felt like enormous victories. I also began honest conversations with Marcus about the problems in our marriage, though I did not reveal the full extent of my betrayal. We started couples counseling to address the communication breakdown and emotional distance that had developed between us. Marcus was willing to acknowledge his role in our marital problems, particularly his tendency to escape into work when family situations became overwhelming. As a family, we began attending therapy sessions focused on improving communication and processing the trauma that Dylan's illness had brought into all of our lives. Dylan gradually began to open up about his feelings of isolation, his fears about dying, and his anger about the changes cancer had brought to our family dynamics. Having a safe space to express these feelings seemed to lift some of the emotional weight he had been carrying. The most significant breakthrough came during a therapy session 6 weeks after our confrontation. Dylan looked directly at me and said, "Mom, what you said to me was the most hurtful thing anyone has ever said to me. But I know you are sick too, just in a different way than me. I want our family to get better together." His maturity and compassion, particularly after everything I had put him through, was humbling beyond words. In that moment, I realized that my son was teaching me about forgiveness, strength, and the true meaning of unconditional love. Dylan's physical health began to improve as our family dynamics healed. His appetite returned, his energy levels increased, and his medical team noted significant improvement in his overall resilience to treatment. The correlation between emotional healing and physical recovery became obvious to all of us. Today, as I watch Dylan sleep in this hospital room after another successful treatment session, I am filled with gratitude for his forgiveness and strength. Our relationship will never be exactly what it was before my betrayal, but it has become something deeper and more honest. Dylan knows that I am not perfect, that mothers can make terrible mistakes, but also that love can survive even the worst failures if we are willing to do the work of rebuilding. I learned that personal pain, no matter how intense, never justifies inflicting cruelty on others, especially our children. I discovered that running away from difficult emotions only makes them more powerful and destructive. Most importantly, I understand now that forgiveness must begin with forgiving ourselves enough to face our failures honestly and commit to becoming better. Dylan is now 18 years old and has been cancer free for 8 months. He is planning to attend college in the fall, and our family has grown stronger through our shared commitment to honesty and healing. Marcus and I renewed our wedding vows last month, not because our marriage is perfect, but because we have learned to face our problems together rather than seeking escape in other places. Sometimes the words we speak in anger reveal truths about ourselves we never wanted to face, but in facing them, we find the path to becoming who we truly want to be. I want to ask you something that has been on my mind since sharing this story with you. Have you ever said something in anger that you immediately regretted? Something that changed a relationship forever? How did you handle the aftermath? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, because I believe we can all learn from each other's experiences with forgiveness and healing. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to help others find it. Subscribe to my channel for more real stories about family forgiveness and second chances. And please share this video with someone who might need to hear that even our worst mistakes can become opportunities for growth and deeper connection. Thank you for listening to my story without judgment and for reminding me that vulnerability and truth can create connection even in our darkest moments. I wish you and your families the courage to face difficult truths with love and the strength to heal together.